The scripture tends to teach us on different levels. There's the literary level, and then there's the symbolic or allegorical level. So we can see that the kings are making a journey to come and see the baby Jesus. But for us, we could relate to it on a spiritual level, that our whole life is a journey to come to Christ. And hopefully, we will have our own version of the star. Now, the star, in a sense, is the first Christmas light. It lights up the heavens to let the world know that the light of the world has come, and that's Christ. And so this star, a special star for them, guides them as they journey so that they can eventually go to Bethlehem to see the baby King of Kings, Jesus. So, for me, I would say in a sense that, as a 14-year-old boy in New Jersey, badly in need of some guidance, fortunately my dad was there to supply it. My dad was truly a tower of stability. He was a very wise man, and God put him there to help me and my brother and sister, no doubt. Eventually, my mom, she was a Baptist, and eventually she converted and became Catholic while she was carrying my sister. And then, of course, I showed up at the end. So when I was 14, in a sense, the star showed up to guide me to Christ, and that my dad gave me a Bible for Christmas that year, 1976, and then in January it was 1977, and then in July he gave me a miraculous medal, which Mary promises great graces to those who wear, and I definitely can testify to the truth of that. So that was a little light shining to show me the way. And so I was inspired by the medal. I did say a prayer holding the medal, asking God to show me a way to get close to him. And then, for some reason, I'm assuming it was the prayer, I picked up the rosary off my mother's dresser and I began to pray it. And, well, the rest is history. So those were lights that guided me on my journey to Christ. Now, Epiphany means arrival. So these kings are journeying to see Christ, and we have a tradition of saying there's three kings because there's three gifts. So, in a sense, you have the first Christmas light with the Star of Bethlehem, but you also, in a sense, have the beginning of the tradition of exchanging gifts at Christmas, because they bring three gifts to Jesus. So they bring gold, which is the king of metals, for Christ, who is the King of Kings. And then they also have incense for him, because he's a priest king, like Melchizedek mentioned in Genesis. First time the word priest exists in the Bible is the priest king Melchizedek, who offers bread and wine. An amazing verse when you think about how much is packed into it, because he's the king of Salem, which is later Jerusalem. So Christ is called the King of the Jews. So here's this amazing prophecy in this person. And just in case you were saying, well, that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with Jesus, the author of Hebrews goes on and on about how it is a symbol for Christ. Melchizedek, Christ is a priest according to the order of Melchizedek, who offers bread and wine. So that's very well clarified by the scripture. So the king, who has gold, also gets incense as a priest, and then he gets myrrh. Now, myrrh is sort of like embalming fluid, a rather strange gift to give someone for the birth of their baby, a little creepy. But we see later on in the scripture that myrrh is used to prepare the body of Jesus for his burial, because he's not only the king and the priest, but he's the sacrifice. And so that becomes clear later on when he offers himself on the cross. In fact, the prophecy of the cross really goes back to Genesis 3:15. They were studying the Shroud of Turin, and one of the things they noticed was that the nail, or the spike, on the cross went through his foot and through his heel, about the most painful option possible, if you think about the heel of your foot. So what does it say in Genesis 3:15? It talks about the offspring crushing the head of the snake. Now, anyone that's ever had to kill a snake, chopping his tail off or something, just going to aggravate him. He's still able to come after you. But the head, that's what you do with a snake. You hit him in the head. So, I remember we went on a youth group trip one time. We went down the Nantahala River, and the kids were asking me, Father, are there any water snakes? It's too cold. There's no water snakes. I got to eat my words later on, because a girl came up to me and said, Father, you remember those snakes? You said they weren't here. What's that over there? I was like, okay. So I'm thinking, how am I going to kill this guy? And I got a paddle, and I took the edge of the paddle, and I turned his head into mashed potatoes. So that was the end of that. But that's how you get a snake. So it says in Genesis, 3:15, he will strike at your heel. So there we see the Shroud of Turin giving a witness to Genesis 3:15 about how the spike went through the heel of Jesus. And we can see that based on the evidence of the Shroud of Turin. Now, I wish that the guy who put the lectionary together had put a little more in there. So remember, too, the other visitor besides the kings were the shepherds. So Christ says, I am the good shepherd, and Scripture calls him the King of Kings. So the kings and the shepherds are there to give homage to Christ, who is the greatest of the kings and greatest of the shepherds. Now, if we look here in Matthew chapter 2, we see it starts out that we have the quote about Bethlehem, which, by the way, means house of bread. So we see a pointing to the Mass at the very beginning, because Christ is the king who is the priest who offers bread and wine for the Mass. So we see here this beautiful quote, Bethlehem, land of Judah, you are by no means least. From you shall come the ruler who will shepherd my people. So then, this is the weird thing. I've always been bewildered by this. It says here that the quote, it says here that Herod was disturbed and all of Jerusalem with him. Now, I can understand Herod, because he's Mr. Evil himself. I mean, how evil do you have to be to want to kill the baby Jesus? That's about as high up there on the scale of evil as you can get. So, but why was the rest of Jerusalem upset? Because they knew that the coming of the Messiah would mean change. And probably change that might involve some sacrifice, some pain, some self-denial. Because, if we apply the gifts to ourselves, in a sense, they gave Christ gold. Do we give him gold? Do we give him the best that we can give him in our life? Do we make sure we have time every day for prayer to give to him? And the incense, the sacrifice. Are we being sacrificial in our love for Christ as he was for us? He gave his life for us on the cross. We see his love for us very clearly every time we look at a crucifix. So are we clearly loving him in return? And the myrrh, pointing to the death of Christ. What does Jesus say to us? You cannot be my disciple unless you deny yourself daily, take up your cross, and follow me. Whoever loses his life in this world for my sake will find it. But whoever keeps his life in this world will lose it. I'm like, what does that mean? Well, to keep your life in this world, the life of sin, the life of neglecting prayer and breaking the commandments, well, that's how you lose your life in the next world. But if you give up the life of sin and you live the life of grace and prayer and the commandments, well, then you're going to gain the life. So it's a matter, the myrrh is really pointing to us being dead to sin. At least that's what we're called to do. Now, when we look at the rest of what's going on here in chapter 2, your assignment from me, should you decide to accept this mission, is to read the whole of chapter 2 of Matthew, because the guy that did the lectionary, in my opinion, cheated us out of some rather important things. So what happens to the Magi? Well, it says, when they departed, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, rise, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, because Herod is going to search for the child to destroy him. So Joseph rose and took the child and his mother by night. Definitely a commando move on Joseph's part. I was kind of like that. I picture him with this really cool axe, going, taking Mary and Jesus out of harm's way. So then we see the evil of Herod. When he realized that he had been deceived by the Magi, he became furious. He ordered a massacre of all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity, 2 years old and under, according to what he learned from the Magi. And I'm not going to read to you the quote because I'm afraid I'm going to start to cry. It's a very sad quote that they have from Scripture. So later on, we see here Herod dies. Herod's all happy about his puny little kingdom, and he's going to defend it by killing children. How sad. And eventually he dies, and his puny little kingdom is gone, and Christ was never really a threat to his puny little kingdom, because Christ is the king of the universe. He's not really interested in that one little spot that Herod had, but Herod saw it that way in his perverse understanding. So we see in the scripture that the angel comes to Joseph and says, "Rise, take the child and his mother, go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead." So that's the end of Herod. That's all she wrote. That's why it's much better to serve God, because the gifts that God gives us last forever. God promises happiness forever. What the world offers is very short term, and it will be gone because we are journeying, just as the Magi went on their journey to see Christ, and after that moved on, that eventually we will hopefully discover Christ in our lives and be ready to move on to eternity to be with the Lord. So let's take an interesting comparison here with Matthew chapter 2 and Revelation 12. A great sign appeared in the sky, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet. Notice how similar that is to Our Lady of Guadalupe. The moon on her feet, clothed with the sun. On her head, a crown of 12 stars. Well, she's obviously queen. That's what we call Mary, the queen of heaven and earth, queen of angels and saints. She was with child and was ready to give birth. Now, this is the scary part. In my opinion, one of the scariest things in all of Scripture. Another sign appeared in the sky, a red dragon with 7 heads. His tail swept away a third of the stars of the sky and hurled them down to the earth. That's understanding that the 1/3 of the angels joined in Satan's rebellion against God in heaven, and they were hurled down to earth. Now this is the scary line, chapter 12, verse 4. Then the dragon stood before the woman about to give birth to devour the child when she gave birth. Now that's pretty creepy. And so what do we see in that? We see Herod. Herod, in a sense, a prototype of the modern politician that has no regard for children in the womb, no regard for the commandments of God. They have their puny little kingdom. They have their money, their power, their honor, their influence, short term. And then what happens? They die, and suddenly they're standing before Christ, just as Herod, who sought to kill Jesus at the end of his life, which wasn't very long to begin with, is suddenly standing in front of Christ, and his last judgment has come. And then Jesus shows him seeking to kill him and killing all these other innocent children up to 2 years of age in the area, trying to get to kill Jesus. Now, of course, we know that eventually Jesus is killed on the cross, and his life is a sacrifice. Now, we see then that the dragon doesn't get the child, and then Mary, the mother of the child, escapes, and he's furious. So what do we see happens here later on in Revelation 12? It says the dragon became angry with the woman. Verse 17, remember God says, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, between her offspring and yours." Who's the devil's offspring? The Pharisees who killed Jesus. Mary's offspring is Jesus. So notice he's angry with the woman because Mary never sins. And he went off to wage war against the rest of her children, those who keep the commandments of God and bear witness to Jesus. That's us. That's the church. So the dragon seeks to damage, to destroy the church. And the church has always been under attack since the beginning. Starting with the attack on Christ, then the first martyr, St. Stephen, then martyring the 12 apostles, and persecutions throughout the centuries of the church. Right now in communist countries and some other ones in the Middle East, there's a persecution of Christians. And so they say the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. Many of the missionaries that came here were martyred by the Indians. And there's different places that have memorials to that. So when we think about the journey of the wise men, they're on a journey to get to Christ. We are on a journey to get to Christ. And so we need to have that light of the Star of the Bethlehem, but our own version of it, a person, an event, some communication, something given to us, maybe like I got the miraculous medal in the Bible and the Rosary. So that was my light to guide me to Christ. So we have lights that God gives us to lead us to Christ, who is the light of the world, so that we can spend eternity with the God of light, the God of truth, the God of goodness, in his kingdom of light and goodness, of love and truth.